Fear, arguably one of the best FPS games ever made. Back in 2005, it rocked the gaming world with its John Woo-inspired gunplay, great use of dynamic lighting, and the clever use of AI, which, in combination with the game's level design, made combat sections incredibly memorable. There were also the horror elements, as Point Man, the game's protagonist, was haunted by various creatures, and also Alma Wade, a spooky little girl in a red dress. But let's be real, most people remember Fear because of its combat and not horror. Originally developed by Monolith Productions, a veteran of FPS games at the time, Fear would go on to have several expansion packs before an official sequel, Fear 2 Project Origin, was released in 2009, once again developed by Monolith. There are many things which can be said on the topic of what happened between the first two games, as well as the quality of both of these games, but that's a story for another time. Today, we'll be talking about something different, something much more sinister and vile. Today, we'll be talking about the last of Alma's bastard children, the last game in the series to date, Fear 3, also known as Threer. Buckle up. Oh boy, where do I even begin? Okay, first things first. Threer wasn't developed by Monolith, but by a different team called Day One Studios, which has since become part of Wargaming, the company behind World of Tanks and similar titles, changing their name to Wargaming Chicago Baltimore in the process. Threer? Okay, I'll stop. Also doesn't use the same engine previous games did, but rather its own. Yeah, that name seems appropriate. Anyway, in Fear 3, you are once again put into the shoes of Point Man, the main character from Fear 1. The game starts off with a voiceover by Paxton Fattel, who gives a brief overview of the story so far, complete with accompanying images from the previous games, and which slowly transition into the present, and oh my god, they gave Point Man a face. They gave him a face, and yeah, he looks like Keanu Reeves' evil brother.
You're breathtaking! You're all breathtaking!
I will talk more on this absolutely horrendous design choice later when we get to the story. For now, let's just continue. The cinematic shows Paxton once again materializing into this world as some sort of psychic ghost, and we see him possess a guard to help his brother escape his torturers in this stylish slow-mo scene, after which the game proper begins. You start off in some sort of prison, and your first task is to escape as your fellow Fear operator, Jin Sung Kwon, pleads for help back in Fairport. Wait. What do you mean, back in Fairport? Well, apparently, this prison is located in Brazil? For some odd reason? Never mind. Anyway, you escape your cell, and the first minute or so, things seem rather normal. You're walking unarmed through a rundown prison swarming with Armacam troops, you know, as a protagonist of a highly praised horror shooter series does. But that soon changes as you stealthily approach an unsuspecting Armacam soldier and stab him in the back.
No good on my end either. I'm wanting to budge.
Why we always gotta set up camp in the greatest shitholes of the earth is beyond me.
Keep trying. Got it to work yesterday.
Copy that. Any progress on your door yet?
Negative.
And what is this in the lower left corner? It looks like a progression bar of sorts. We'll get to that quickly. You pick up the pistol from the dead guard, go over to the next room with the second guard who spots you, you start shooting and... wait, press Q to cover? Cover. Okay. We apparently have a cover mechanic in a Fear game now. So I take some damage from these first couple of enemies. Let me just check my health real quick. Oh, what's that? We also have regenerating health now? Why, this just keeps getting better and better. It hasn't been 5 minutes and I already want to stop playing. Not a good first impression so far. Still, you soon pick up the submachine gun and have your first proper fight of the game, complete with bullet time.
Oh shit, he's loose!
I also seem to be getting more and more of these progression bars. That's because this game uses a point system. Basically, the game rewards points for certain playstyles or certain feats, like kill 10 enemies without taking damage, or kill an X number of enemies with a certain weapon and such. The payoff for accumulating enough points is that you level up your character, and with each level you get an increase in either ammo capacity, health points, or how long your bullet time lasts. The problem is, you don't get to control any of these, so you're left at the mercy of the game as to which benefit you'll actually get. There is also a story element to these points, but that comes later. For now, you're still moving throughout the prison, you see a vision of Alma every so often, coupled with some other paranormal stuff, just as a reminder that you are, in fact, still playing the Fear game, and you get in front of this big room where Paxton says,
"Take care with your flashlight, it will give you away."
Nah, fuck that shit, let's go in guns blazing. Is this game inspired by John Woo or not?
Give me some cover fire! Got a hostile target! On your left! Push him out!
And I died. Okay, let's try that again. Oh look, a shotgun. Shotguns have always been good in Fear, have they not?
Squad, fan out! On your right!
They ruined it. Also, you can only carry 2 weapons now. Let me remind you that you could carry 3 in Fear 1 and 4 in Fear 2. There is no reason whatsoever why you can only carry 2 now. Also, another thing that I've noticed in these few gunfights is that my sensitivity feels way off. I can't hit half of my shots. And guess what? For who knows what reason, the default sensitivity is almost ramped up to max. And why? Okay, reducing it makes the gameplay a lot better, but it still feels way higher than it should. Still, let's continue. After a couple of more horror sequences and another big shootout, a cutscene plays in which you get attacked by some ghost monster thing, and an explosion occurs, crumbling the ground beneath you, thus allowing you to escape, and at which point the level ends. The second level starts you off in a sewer, but you soon get to the slums, and I think this is a good time to talk about the level design and to go more in depth about the gameplay. Well, first of all, Fear 3 is a very, very linear game. The most linear in the series by far, and I feel like the slums is the perfect encapsulation of that sentiment. Thing is, in theory, a level based around the slums should ideally provide players with multiple ways of approaching their objective and getting an one-up on the enemy, considering how many houses, streets, and other buildings can be connected and intertwined. It is the perfect setting for a non-linear maze-type level, which is also grounded and based in reality at the same time. And yeah, at first, the game tricks you into believing exactly that. This level does have some interesting encounters. Enemies can startle you from the rooftops, they can come out of different buildings and whatnot, and at times, you are allowed to experiment a little bit with your approach. But that's all there is to it. At the end of the day, you still have to go through that one intended corridor the designers put in to advance the level. The game ultimately sets you down on a single path, as you know exactly through which house and exactly through which street you can pass through in order to advance to the next section. There is barely anything to explore. The most you'll get is either a box of ammo or these glowing corpses, which you can consume, I guess, for a psychic link and 1500 points. And this problem is only exaggerated in the later parts of the game. Subsequent levels take place in a huge department store and later in suburbs, and you would think that these places would allow for a more open style approach to level design, but nope. They are as equally, if not even more linear than before. And don't get me wrong, Fear as a series wasn't exactly known for its open world or anything. The previous games were also essentially linear, however, they managed to mask their linearity pretty well, at least the first game did. In the first game especially, you had these optional areas you could explore for bits and pieces of the game's lore, or you could find supplies and upgrades for your character, and some of these weren't just placed in a room on the opposite side of a corridor. And all this talk about the level design ties into the heart of the game, which is its combat. So, how's the combat? It's serviceable, I guess? The majority of weapons from the previous game make a return, although they all look different. Again. You start off pretty much every mission unarmed or with a pistol, and you'll soon replace it with the SMG, which will be your workhorse weapon for the entire game. It does decent damage and is reliable at both long and short ranges. I already mentioned how you can only carry 2 weapons at a time, so the second slot will either go to this absolute hideous monstrosity of a shotgun, or something else entirely, like the burst-firing assault rifle for example. Now, describing how these weapons work and feel is kinda difficult, so let me try and explain. For the most part, weapons feel and sound okay. They are not on par with Fear 1 guns, not by a long shot, but they are not bad per se. Enemies, for the most part, react accordingly when being shot at, and you can have a clear indication when you hit and hurt someone, because you'll see blood splatter, you'll see gore, the pain animations will play and all the other crap. It's just that the damage output is inconsistent. Let's take the shotgun for instance. Sometimes you can tear someone to shreds with a single blast, other times enemies might take 2, 3, or even 4 shotgun blasts.
Any units near the grid box 1-3 Alpha. Any illegal activity in the area? We need a sit rep.
And this guy here isn't even fucking armored. This applies to pretty much every weapon across the board, with the exception of the sniper rifle. The sniper rifle is just awesome. It usually one-shots enemies and is by far the best weapon in the entire game. The same cannot be said for this electric laser thingy. It just takes way too long to kill someone with it. The same damage inconsistency also appears to apply to you as well. Sometimes you can die in a couple of hits, but at other times it feels as if you've tanked an entire magazine worth of ammo and somehow you're still standing. And since the game operates on regenerating health, you can never be too sure how much of it you actually have left. As mentioned already, the level design is pretty linear, and this goes for most of the combat sections as well. Even though there are instances where the combat areas do open up a little bit, most of the time you'll engage enemies just like in any other modern military FPS. That is to say, you'll shoot at them from medium range, occasionally popping in and out of cover. The AI also reflects this sort of gameplay style, as most of the time they will just take cover and try to shoot back at you, occasionally chucking a grenade or 2 your way. This is a shame really, because in those few instances where you actually get thrown into proper combat arenas with different and branching paths, the AI does know how to utilize them, at least to an extent. On top of all that, you are once again fighting waves of enemies and not individual squads. And a friendly reminder, squad combat was a major aspect of what made the first game so memorable, and it's depressing to see that it never made a comeback. Furthermore, you aren't very fast, and the sprint is mostly laughable, so your movement is fairly restricted. This is where the iconic bullet time effect comes into play, and you'll rely heavily on this thing if you want to get out of some of the later fights. The cover system also leaves much to be desired. It being implemented in the first place makes it safe to assume that the game will try and make you use it fairly often. Except, there is the problem where you can still get shot even if you make sure you're completely covered. On the other hand, if you try to play like you're in a John Woo film, you know, like one of the things that made the series so awesome in the first place, you'll more than likely die due to clumsy movement and inconsistent damage output. So you are kinda forced to use cover every now and again. However, to be fair, the transition between various pieces of cover is mostly fluent and seamless, so it has that going for it. Okay, what else do we have? Oh yes, the point system. Basically, as already mentioned, the game will reward points for successfully completing a certain task, like killing an X amount of enemies with a certain weapon, or camping behind cover for too long. This system works both in favor of the overall combat loop, but also against it. What do I mean by this? Well, given the existence of these challenges, it is safe to say that it tries to incentivize you playing a certain playstyle in order to achieve them. You might feel pressure to opt for a certain gun or choose to stay in cover, even if you assume that a more aggressive approach is more viable to your current situation. There is also the issue of weapon availability and ammo scarcity for certain guns that might stop you from completing a certain gun challenge. Of course, you can always choose to simply not finish any of these challenges and, just do your own thing. But that way, you risk obtaining those vital upgrades which can provide to be extremely important in the later chapters. Now, the game isn't particularly hard, at least not on commando difficulty anyway, but it's always nice to have more bullet time juice left, or being able to carry more ammo. And outside of combat, there is really only one of two ways to accumulate more points, which are either to do these psychic links or to find this here artifact, this doll or whatever it is. But I only found two in the first two levels, and to be completely honest, I couldn't be arsed to look for more. To sum up, the combat leaves much to be desired, and it feels a lot closer to a modern generic military shooter than it does to a proper Fear game. I'd say it lands somewhere in the middle. Moving on, let's talk about the other core aspect of a Fear game, and that's the horror. So, how is it? Well, it's there, I guess?
Where is he?
Fear 3 has by far the weakest scares in the entire series. Alma makes a return and she still appears from time to time. And you're also chased by this monster creeper thing, which causes a few nightmare sequences and whatnot. But it's all pretty weak and boring stuff. You've seen this shit before. The overall presentation also doesn't help. As stated in the beginning, Fear 3 doesn't run on the same engine as the previous ones, and it shows. Now, it doesn't look bad, per se. Graphically speaking, this was pretty standard for a game in 2011. The models, textures, and animations all look fairly decent, and each interval is set in a different environment. Hell, this game has the most environmental diversity out of all the Fear games, expansion packs included. And some of these do stand out, such as the department store in Interval 3 and the houses in the suburbs in Interval 4. Subsequently, these two intervals also have the strongest horror elements. In Interval 3 in particular, the department store is turned into a home for the people of Fairport who are driven mad by their contact with Alma and who become these weird violent cultists. The entire level has you traversing through their home turf, where at first you're just being watched by these depraved creatures. You do get the sense of being an unwanted guest in someone else's home and that you are being hunted. The houses in the suburbs are also filled with strange cultist imagery, and this also sells the effect of Fairport going to absolute shit. Furthermore, the game is filled with non-horror set pieces, like the ground opening up beneath you as if reality itself is being torn apart by the strength of Alma's cries. Okay, so far this looks and sounds pretty well, you might say. So, where's the catch? Well, the first major problem is the game's art direction. Just like its predecessor, Fear 3 drastically changes the visual style of the entire game, and it's the most boring one so far. Let's take a look back at the previous games. Fear 1 had a distinctively industrial art style. The overall majority of the game took place in enclosed spaces like office complexes, warehouses, or some sort of laboratories. The weapons and enemies were grounded in reality for the most part, which in turn made the more sci-fi and fantastic elements of the game stand out way more, and they were more memorable. The second game did a 180 and went for a full-blown sci-fi aesthetic, complete with loads of bloom and glow and other sources of redundant lights. However, it also added a lot more detail into the levels, which was in sharp contrast to the mostly barren environments of Fear 1. Fear 3 is neither here nor there. The overall environments are more varied, but it feels like there's way less stuff in them, and all the details that are there don't feel natural, if that makes sense. And some rooms look pretty barren, with barely any stuff in them. The weapons also went through a redesign in each of the main installments, and somehow they look the absolute worst in Fear 3. I mean, just look at the fucking shotgun, what the fuck is this design? Also, the constant change in art direction hurts the game's identity. I no longer feel like I'm playing the same series. If it wasn't for the story connecting all these games together, I might as well call this game Mystery Soldier Man and the Scary Girl Part 3, and it wouldn't make much of a difference. There is also another major flaw with the visuals in Fear 3, and you'll probably guess it by now, and that is the lighting. To be short, the lighting fucking sucks. And let me remind you that lighting played a huge part in the series. In Fear 1, it was used masterfully to set its oppressive and dark atmosphere, as well as help disguise any visual shortcomings, plus having dynamic light sources in combat arenas meant you could shoot them, thus making every encounter that much more chaotic and memorable. In Fear 3, the lack of dynamic lighting takes away so much from the game's already shattered identity, and exposes so much of the laziness that went into these levels, such as copy and pasted rooms, which you can clearly see if you're paying even the slightest bit of attention. And yeah, some of these areas can still look gorgeous at times, but that's not the fucking point. because these are so few and far in between. The entire game is also way too bright for a fair game. You don't even need a flashlight. Hell, I almost forgot to even mention the fucking thing in this video, that's how useless the flashlight is. Furthermore, all the particle effects were toned down, so now the aftermath of any gunfight looks like any boring modern military shooter, just with a bit more blood and gore. These are by far the biggest downfalls of this game, even more so than the watered down shooting mechanics, because a good presentation might have covered up some of its shortcomings, but alas. Still, we're not done yet. We have the story to go through. Okay, picking up where we left off. When you get out of the slums and arrive back into the city, your immediate mission is to rescue your fellow Fear operative Jin, while your main mission is to reunite with your mother Alma, who is somewhere in or near Fairport City. The city itself is in total chaos and disarray, following the events of the prior games, with cultists and Armacan soldiers running around killing each other. In the meantime, you learn that Alma is about to give birth to her and Beckett's baby. Yeah, remember that guy and the ending of Fear 2? The apocalypse going down in Fairport are apparently the consequences of Alma going into labor, which causes reality to literally break. So enough, you find Jin, but she gets kidnapped by Armacam soldiers, and you have to rescue her again. What follows is a couple of levels of you wandering through the city, fighting off Armacam troops and cultists, and also evil demonic dogs apparently. While you search for Jin first, and then you're supposed to find Beckett, who has also been captured by Armacam for some reason, and all the while your brother continuously reminding you that you should let Jin go and hurry to Alma and whatnot. Oh yeah, you're also constantly taunted by these Armacam face commanders, these big armored dudes who can summon regular enemies and also phase through walls. Most of this stuff will be delivered to you through cutscenes, which play before and after every mission. And I gotta say, the direction of these cutscenes is pretty fucking good, and they as well should be, because they managed to get the John Carpenter to help them out with the cinematics. However, as with almost every other good idea this game had, there has to be a downside to this. Mainly, the POV in cinematics constantly shifts from first person to third person, and while the transitions are seamless, this way of delivering the plot simply does not work, because Point Man, even though he has a face now, and oh boy, what a face it is still a mute character. He doesn't utter a single word throughout the game. He just makes these grim and edgy faces whenever another character speaks to him. In Fear 1, the whole point of him not having a face is because the Point Man was you, the player. He was just a vessel for the player. And we can't use the Gordon Freeman defense on him either, because in Half-Life, you can never ever leave Gordon's perspective. What the devs should have done here was either give Point Man a voice to make him a complete character, or to have the cutscenes never leave the first-person perspective, because at the very least, that would sell the illusion of the Point Man being you, the player. Here, they opted for the worst possible solution, so it just makes the entire story even sillier. Furthermore, the game almost completely removed any instance of background storytelling items, like PDAs and phone recordings, so the most you'll get now is hearing some soldiers chatter here and there. And look, I know not a lot of people enjoy these exposition dumps, but I personally don't see a problem in having these for those that do like getting more invested into the world. And even so, the environmental storytelling aspect took a big nosedive as well, where, except in those few areas in intervals 3 and 4, where you could get some sense of what was happening based on various cultist writings on the wall, and the way the environments were set up, most of everything else looks pretty generic and doesn't really stand out. There are also far less characters than before, so let's see here. Not counting Alma and Pointman, you only have Paxton and Jin, and that's it. I don't really count the face commanders as characters, they're just, you know, the boss you have to beat. They have no personality. As a result of all this, the plot also suffers from horrible pacing issues, because the entire game can be summed up into two major sections. Combat, horror sequence. Combat, horror sequence, rinse and repeat. You never get any proper downtime like you did in the previous games. You never get the chance to properly get your bearings and reflect on anything you've learned. Though, to be fair, there isn't much to be learned in the first place, because the story itself opens up a lot more questions than it closes, and is really, really messy. You do learn a lot about the background of the two brothers, and you learn that the spirit and memories of Harlan Wade still haunt you and you must destroy them. That monster tank that follows you, yeah, that's basically the incarnation of Harlan and his evil memories. You know, it's just a jolly good plot. Jin also tells you that you must stop the birth of Alma's child, and this presents the central conflict between the two brothers, as Paxton constantly rambles on about family and whatnot. Paxton is by far the most fleshed out character in the game, which makes sense given the context of the entire series, and you can kinda understand why he became the way he is. However, the problem lies in literally everything else. Let's take Karmaken for example. The progression in their power level from Fear 1 to Fear 3 is some insane and goofy shit. It's downright anime and even more so. True, they were pretty competent in Fear 1 and had access to some experimental weaponry and high-tech mumbo-jumbo, but their equipment was still mostly grounded and it didn't look too much out of place. Other than the replica soldiers, they mostly employed normal security guards. And fast forward to Fear 2 and Fear 3, and these guys are apparently equipped with mecha suits, dimension-breaking super soldiers who run around Fairport killing civilians, all the while your Fear comrades call it a PR nightmare. Oh yeah, they also run torture prisons beneath Brazilian slums. Come on now. Okay, so after you defeat the Face Commander and rescue Jin the second time, you rush to find Beckett, who is important for some reason, and you do find him, and Paxton enters into his mind and his body. Beckett rambles on about Alma for a minute and explodes.
This man is a shell, brother. Empty. All he desires is to forget.
To kill the filthy maggot that grows inside her! She's no longer your mother, child. Must. It cannot be allowed.
Wow. What a way to kill off your protagonist. And what was the point of that? I don't know. It's never brought up again. And look, we're already in the last level. Somehow. You go to this compound where you were kept as a child and experimented on in order to find and destroy objects which remind you of the torture you endured before finally facing off the Creeper Avatar in the most boring boss fight of the entire series. It's just basically shoot the monster in its weak point until it dies and avoid the 2 or 3 attacks it has. And then finally, we get to the ending. Alma is giving birth in some shack, and you can get one of 2 endings based on the number of points you've earned. Yes! Remember how I said there was a story element attached to the points? Well, you see, all of those points accumulate to give off a final score which determines who the favorite son is. But wait a minute, you ask. You play alone through the entire game, don't you? Well, yes, but you see, this game also has a built-in co-op feature, where one player assumes the control of Point Man while the other controls Paxton. And furthermore, you can actually play through the entire game as Paxton on your own, but you have to pass that mission as Point Man first in order to unlock Paxton. And you know what? Paxton is ridiculously fun. He comes with his own set of powers, he can shoot these red balls at enemies, but he can also assume control of any human enemy in the game, control them for a bit, and then make them explode. Paxton can be incredibly broken at times, because the game was intended to be played from the Point Man's perspective, but nevertheless, he's by far the most entertaining factor of the entire game. As for the co-op portion, you pretty much go through the same levels, except this time there's two of you. The levels compensate double power by throwing in more enemies, at least I think they do. It feels like there's more of them, and you can revive each other. Paxton can also give Point Man a shield of sorts, while Point Man's bullet time applies to Paxton as well. And given how there's a different outcome based on who gets more points, it is interesting to see the two of you compete with each other as well as cooperate. And this is where all the good things about the co-op end. Because even though this is apparently one of the main selling points of this entire fucking game, it feels blatantly unfinished. First of all, the levels were crafted to accommodate one player, Point Man specifically. So the two of you makes the entire level feel even more cramped than it actually is. Also, you share the same cutscenes, so the player playing Paxton witnesses everything from the Point Man's perspective. Furthermore, there is this weird rubber band issue, where if players drift too much apart from each other, you will automatically teleport to each other, though I do not know what exactly causes this, because it happened to me once when I went to the opposite corner of a room to get the psychic link, but me and my friend, we couldn't reproduce the second time in the second level when we purposefully went into the opposite direction of each other. Also, the animations for the jump kick and slide kick moves look absolutely ridiculous. Oh yeah, and my footage got corrupted while recording this part. This game is fucking cursed, man! Okay, so what's the difference in the two endings? Well, in the Point Man's ending, you kill Paxton for the second time, even though he's a ghost, and Alma dies and you decide to keep the baby. Jin informs you that everything is returned to normal, while in Paxton's ending, you assume control of Point Man's body and cannibalize Alma, and also decide to keep the baby. Wow, what a fitting ending to a franchise. Okay, let's wrap things up. This video is already long enough. In the end, what is there left to say? In my honest opinion, Fear 3's greatest downfall is that it bears the name of Fear. If it didn't, it might have actually been a decent modern FPS game with some fun quirks. And this goes for both gameplay and the story. If this wasn't Fear, the story of two brothers who traveled from Brazil to an apocalyptic American city in an effort to meet up with their undead pregnant ghost mother while murdering everything in their path would have made a decent B-tier horror schlock. The criticism directed towards its gameplay would have also been far more forgiving, because in that case, you wouldn't be talking about a sequel to a highly beloved and highly successful shooter, you'll be talking about a mid-range random shooter from 2011 with some fun ideas here and there. After all, in the end, this game wasn't forgettable, unlike some other titles. It did have some moments that stuck with me. Unfortunately, Day One Studios just couldn't keep up with the weight the Fear name carried, and as such, I simply can't recommend it to anyone. Just can't look at this game as an independent title. You're better off forgetting about this one, just play the original, and hell, play Fear 2. Fear 3 is basically 2 but worse in every way. And as for me, it's time to uninstall this game and never look at it again, hopefully. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. hopefully you managed to get to the end of this video. And as for next time, I'll try and review something better. Take care everybody, and goodbye.